Deep in the rural heart of India, in a village called Vedgram, lived a man whose reputation was a local legend. His name was Mahadev. He was a man of significant wealth, but in Vedgram, wealthy was synonymous with infamous. Mahadev was a goldsmith. For decades, the steady clack-clack of his hammer served as the village's clock, but his true craft was deception. He was a master of chemical adulteration, using complex mixtures to melt down customers' gold, skimming off the pure metal and replacing it with cheap alloys. Yet his hoarded riches bought him no comfort. He lived in a house filled with 3 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, and a dozen grandchildren, all of whom openly discussed his death as a financial windfall. They left him to starve in his workshop, leaving the old man to survive on nothing but the smoke from his pipe and the bitterness of his own isolation. This is a visual representation of Moh, a Hindu philosophical concept of toxic worldly attachment. For Mahadev, his gold wasn't a resource, it was a spiritual trap. The more he accumulated, the more he withdrew, creating an infinite loop where his possessions were the only things that felt real. This cycle blinded him to the world. He became indifferent to his family's resentment and even the slow decay of his own body. His entire universe had narrowed down to the weight of metal, while his spirit was effectively withering away. Mahadev had reached a grim state of existence. He was a man who possessed everything the village envied, yet he lived in a state of total spiritual poverty. His only connection to another living being was a parrot named Atmaram. Every morning, Mahadev would recite a chant to the bird, Sadguru.Shiv.Datta. To him, these weren't holy words. They were just a rhythmic habit, a hollow sound he used to fill the silence of his workshop. The breaking point came through a simple accident. A child playing in the house unlatched the cage. With a sudden flutter of green wings, Atmaram flew out of the workshop and into the open sky. The sight of that empty cage triggered a panic Mahadev hadn't felt in decades. This bird was his only emotional anchor. It didn't ask for his gold or wait for his death. In an instant, the one pure thing in his life was gone. Driven by a desperation he couldn't control, the old miser dropped his hammer and ran. He abandoned his coins and his fortress-like workshop, chasing the bird into a world he had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. This illustrates Maya, the force of cosmic illusion. Maya lures the ego forward by keeping a desired object just inches away. It is chaotic and elusive, designed to lead a person into a chase that strips them of their composure. Mahadev followed the parrot into the blinding midday heat. He was barefoot, his skin blistering on the sun-scorched earth. He wasn't thinking about gold or his reputation. He was simply a broken old man, stumbling through a shimmering, distorted landscape of dust and heat. As he ran, the village mocked him. Children jeered and clapped at the sight of the wealthy goldsmith reduced to a frantic animal. Farmers threw pebbles at him, turning his personal tragedy into a cruel public comedy. This public humiliation was a systematic dismantling of his identity. Every laugh from a neighbor and every stone thrown by a child tore away a piece of the ego he had built over 70 years. He was losing his dignity along with his bird. This is the function of Maya. It forces the individual to abandon their pride and their social standing, dragging them through the dirt until there is nothing left but the raw, unadorned self. By nightfall, Mahadev was broken. He was miles from home, shivering in a dark mango orchard, starving and utterly exhausted. He had hit rock bottom, stripped of his wealth, his family, and his pride. In the darkness, he stumbled upon a group of men sitting by a small lamp. Terrified and confused, Mahadev cried out his usual chant, Sadguru Dat Shiv Dat Datta. The men, who were actually thieves hiding their loot, thought they were being discovered by an authority or a spirit, and fled into the trees in a blind panic. Where the thieves had been sitting, Mahadev found a rusted copper pot buried in the soil. Inside was a fortune far greater than anything he had ever skimmed as a goldsmith, a massive hoard of ancient, heavy gold coins. The next morning, a second miracle occurred. Atmaram, the parrot, flew down from the trees and hopped voluntarily back into the cage. The chase was over. The chaotic ordeal of the previous day had served its purpose. By dragging Mahadev through suffering and humiliation, the force of Maya had prepared him to receive both a literal fortune and a spiritual awakening. When Mahadev returned to Vedgram, his posture had changed. He no longer walked with the hunched, suspicious shoulders of a miser. To a man who had just faced starvation in the dark over a few green feathers, the gold in his hands no longer felt like a lifeblood. It felt like a burden he was finally ready to set down. He called the village together and made a public confession. He admitted to every dishonest skimming and chemical trick he had used for decades. He announced that for the next 30 days, anyone he had ever cheated could come to his door and claim their money back. No questions asked. The village was stunned, but the local priest saw an opportunity. He claimed Mahadev owed him 50 rupees, a blatant lie for a debt that never existed. Without a word of protest, Mahadev handed the priest 2 gold coins, paying the fraudulent debt in full. In that moment, Mahadev's radical honesty became a mirror. His willingness to pay even the liars exposed the hidden greed of the respectable society around him. Mahadev channeled his remaining fortune back into the soil of Vedgram. The rusted thieves' gold became the funding for this massive, ornate, multi-tiered temple, and a massive public pond designed to hold water even in the harshest droughts. Once his worldly debts were settled, Mahadev left. He walked toward the Himalayas to live as a renounced ascetic, leaving behind only the temple and a small monument dedicated to the parrot that led him there. The story of Atmaram suggests that the cure for human greed isn't the accumulation of more, it's the painful purification of our attachments. What we often perceive as the tragic loss of everything we